All righty. Hello and good evening, and a pleasure to see you. Well, I really can't see you, but it is a pleasure to be on YouTube talking to you right now. I can, even though I can't see you, I can definitely, most certainly see your comments here in the YouTube chat. So thank you so much for checking in. Mr. Chunky Chan, you're going to have to refresh my memory. I know that you are one of my students, but but I'm not sure which one of you that is. And so refresh my memory on who you are. Hey, there we are. Hey, right on. So I just want to give a shout out to Mahith. Hello, welcome. Shoria, Nia, Shrinity, Nika, Vanessa, Caitlin, Diego, Jayla, Nitya, Emma, Julia, Maddie, Hannah, Mason, and Leo, giving everybody a shout out who's in the chat. Also giving a shout out to everybody who I know we have even more people here who are not in the chat right now. But I do want to go ahead and get rocking and rolling. I also, actually, before we get to the history, oh, it is Nico. Nico, thank you. I also want to give a shout out to my daughter, Libby. Libby, are you willing to turn on your video for a moment and just kind of wave to everybody? Hello, Libby. Oh, and Libby even has a Constitution background.
Well, you told me it was about the Constitution, so I thought I would put that out.
Nice. Well, Libby, thank you. Libby is going to be monitoring the chat throughout the evening and just kind of keeping me on pace. And Libby, thank you. So just kind of keeping everything rocking and rolling, make sure that I get to everybody. Also give a shout out to Jeremy, Noah, CJ, Christopher, hello, Sadie, Daniel, and then I'm not sure who Ops on 60 frames per second, but hello to you as well. CJ is one of my former students, so hello, CJ. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and, like I said, this is an opportunity for us to go over the study guide. And let me go ahead and I'm just going to pull up that study guide right now so that we can take a look at what we're looking at for tonight. I just closed the tab, and so I need to reopen it again. So I'll do a quick screen share. This is, you know how this works. You have done this before because this is our third YouTube live exam review. So, essentially the way we do this is you tell me what you would like to learn about, because we have an hour. We're going to stop right around 8 o'clock. And so you're going to tell me which topics on the study guide you think are most critical to you, and so you're going to basically guide this. I will start off by saying, I'll stop the screen share, and I'll start off by saying this, that the format of the exam, if you're wondering what the format is, I'm basically going to lay it out the same way that we have done the two previous unit exams. We're going to start off with multiple choice, and that multiple choice will be on the topics that I've put here in the study guide. We're then going to get on to a matching portion. And again, the matching, I can go ahead and just show you the vocab right there, right? That vocab that's at the bottom. This is just a printed copy of the study guide. I think that format has worked well. So it'll be a matching on the vocabulary, and then after the multiple choice and the matching will be a short answer portion. And so the short answer portion will be, again, like you're used to. I think you're used to these types of exams by now. It'll be a few questions. I haven't decided exactly how many yet. Probably, I'm guessing around 4 or 5 short answer questions that will be on a range of different topics, again, that we have learned. So what I would love to hear from you right now is what you are most interested in, or what you have the greatest questions or concerns about. And you will just throw those right in the chat, because that is how I can best help you. You're the ones who are here watching live this evening. So I would love to get your feedback on what you want to learn about first. So go ahead and throw that in the chat. While you are waiting for that, I can mention a couple of other things. Certainly, number one, the highlights from the Constitutional Convention. Already, I want to say there are about 3 or 4 questions, multiple choice questions on that. Checks and balances, there will definitely be something. That's number 2 on the study guide. There will be at least a few questions on checks and balances. Federalist Papers, I'll get to that in just a moment because I'm already seeing some questions that are starting to come in, so that's a good thing. First of all, Sharia asks federal versus state government. So I'm assuming that you're talking about what is at the bottom of my first page here, where it is federal powers, state powers, and shared powers. And one of the ways that I can help you is I am actually going to go to the enhanced version of the Constitution Interactive Notebook. I'm going to do a screen share here and show you. Let me do this here. And I will show you some of the resources that you have available to you. So if we go to, we scroll down here. This is the final page that I told you that you needed to be accountable for in the Constitution Interactive Notebook. And by the way, the Constitution Interactive Notebook, just to be clear for those of you listening, pages 1 through 14, that was all you needed to turn in. We're going to go ahead and turn in pages 15 through 22 after winter break. So don't even worry about those right now. Don't, like, it's not even an issue. What you do need to worry about, though, is this separation here. So let me take a moment just to talk about this. In the enhanced version, this is not in your original version, but in the enhanced version, I actually gave you an example. And so I'll go ahead and I'm gonna zoom in on this because we really didn't talk too much about this in class. So let me explain this. There in the federal system or federalism, it's the exact same thing. There are certain powers that are just reserved for the national government. We talked about this a little bit, not too much though. Depends on the class. There are some powers that are reserved just to the states. You see those over here on the right-hand side. And then there are some powers that they share. And this is in this Venn diagram. This is that middle ground area there. So for example, the United States government has the power to declare war. The United States government has the power to maintain armed forces. If you'll recall, that was a sticking point under the Articles of Confederation, is like, who's exactly in charge of protecting our country? There could be no standing armies, and really the militias, the state militias, were more powerful and more prepared at that time. So under the Constitution, only the United States government can declare war. Only the United States government can maintain armed forces, establish foreign policy. California can't go and enter into a treaty with Japan or with Mexico. Only the United States government can do that. They can do like trade agreements, but not like official treaties. Only the United States government can regulate interstate trade. Interstate trade means trade between between the states, right? California to Arizona, New York to New Jersey, as well as regulating foreign trade. So if we're going to, for a long time, we had a boycott on goods, buying or selling goods with Cuba in protest of the communist regime under Fidel Castro in Cuba. So that was imposed by the United States government, and no state could decide, well, you know what, we're going to have a different arrangement with Cuba. They could not do that. Only the United States government can regulate trade with other countries. Make copyright and patent laws. That is exclusively the domain of the federal government. Post office, the same thing, and coin money. And remember, coining money or printing paper money, that was another thing that we talked about under the Articles of Confederation that was kind of going out of control with all 13 different states making their own money. And so under the Constitution, we made it so that only the United States government would be responsible for creating money. And we would have one currency, and that is the United States dollar. Over here on the other side, the states have certain powers that are just reserved to them as well. So establishing local governments. When we say local governments, we mean county, like the county of Los Angeles, cities like the city of Santa Clarita. So those are local governments. The United States government, the federal government, stays out of that. Establish and maintain schools. Education, for the most part, 99% is regulated by the states. You could argue that there is federal funding that goes towards free and reduced lunch programs, that goes to special education programs. So there is some federal money. There is the United States Department of Education. And so the United States gets involved a little bit in education, but by and large, the curriculum always set by the individual states, right? And the rules defining your day-to-day experience. When we were trying to figure out how we were going to create a brand new schedule in the midst of a pandemic with distance learning, the United States government, the federal government, doesn't even get involved in that. It is the states, and the states, by and large, delegated that authority to the local school districts to determine that. So establish, maintain, and kind of regulate schools, curriculum, their schedules, all of that is the states. Regulate trade within the states. So within the states, they can make laws that affect just trade that happens within that individual state. Conducting elections. This, of course, is a hot topic right now, right? Because there are some states, for example, just recently, the state of Texas challenged Michigan and Wisconsin and Georgia and Pennsylvania. I think those are the 4 states that the state of Texas challenged. They sued those states in the United States Supreme Court, saying, you know what, we don't think that you conducted your elections right, and we don't think that you did the mail-in voting right, and you didn't go through the process what you're supposed to do. So the state of Texas sued those 4 states, and it went directly to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court essentially said they shut it down right away. And they did not provide an explanation. The Supreme Court was very succinct in their ruling, but I think that part of the reason why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did was because essentially the Constitution says that states conduct their elections the way that they do. That is in the Constitution. The states decide whether or not there's going to be mail-in balloting and how that mail-in balloting is going to take place, and all of those different rules that govern elections, all of the different rules for collecting ballots and counting ballots, and whether or not you're going to have paper backups and machine voting and all of that. That is determined by the state governments. And I think most constitutional scholars would say that's a good thing, because if you have a big national election, like the election for president of the United States, there is no one who could, who could control on a nationwide level. No one can control an election like that. It is, if you are going to do something fishy with an election, you would need to get the buy-in of tens of thousands of election workers from all different states. So I think that is why the founders built that system in, so that elections were very intentionally decentralized and pushed out to all the states. And then finally, providing for public safety. So the states are responsible for providing fire protection, fire departments and police departments, highway patrol, sheriff's department, all of that. That is the purview of the states. The United States government, of course, does have the FBI. They have the United States Marshal Service. So they do have some law enforcement agencies. They have the National Forest, the fire department for the Angeles National Forest, the U.S. Forest Service. But for the most part, public safety, day-to-day public safety is provided by the states. And then finally, in the middle here, you have this middle ground where you have these are the powers that both the United States government and the state governments have, right? Federal and state. They can raise taxes because the governments need taxes in order to survive. They can provide for the public welfare, however they see fit to do that, right? So if governments decide, for example, to get into the business of providing health insurance assistance, right? Like you've heard of the Affordable Care Act. It's more commonly known as Obamacare. That is something that has been taken on by the federal government. However, the state of California also has Covered California, I think it's called. And so they can, under the Constitution, they can provide for the public welfare. Criminal justice. So there are, while the police and sheriff's departments get mostly involved with, local, keeping the public safe, there are both state crimes and federal crimes, right? So for example, the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, there was a growing movement to protect people who are victims of crimes that are specifically targeting people, for example, for the color of their skin. And so it is a hate crime, and it is a federal crime to murder someone because of the color of their skin, for example. And so that's when you could commit both a state crime and a federal crime and be held accountable at both the state level and the federal level. So criminal justice, there are state crimes and then there are federal crimes. And so that's where you get criminal justice there. Borrowing money, both states and the federal government can borrow money, charter banks, and finally build roads. So the local government is responsible for the building and maintenance of most roads. However, if you take a look at our interstate highway system, if you've ever driven or ridden on Interstate 5, right? That goes right by Valencia, Stevenson Ranch, Castaic. That's Interstate 5. That is a federally maintained road. And so it's actually a combination of state of California funds and United States government funds that help to build and maintain those federal highways. So anyway, that is the system of federalism, the federalist system. Shoria, I hope that I answered your question. Okay, Libby, I think if you're still there, Libby, I think Nitya's question is the next question. We haven't had too many questions come in so far. So Nitya is the next one, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Nitya asks, do we have to write, oh, I'll stop this screen share here. Nitya asks, do we have to write anything on number 5 for the study guide, or do we have to just study those topics? So number 5, oh yeah, to fill in the study guide. Yeah, Nitya, you don't need to fill in anything. The only places you need to fill in on the study guide were the places where I put in blue, replace this text with your response. So that is a good question. Okay. The next question, Leo says, can you go over the elastic clause? Leo, I absolutely can. And let me go ahead. I think the best way for me to do this would be to go to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And to be honest, Leo, we didn't talk too much about this. So there we go. Okay. So in Article 1, Section 8, and I'll talk about it just briefly because this is the Article 1, Section 8. Okay. So at the very, very end, okay, so Article 1, Section 8, let me zoom in on this. This is the part of the Constitution that gives Congress all of its powers. So this is something that's worth going over and talking about a little bit. So you can see Clause 1, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay for the debts, common defense, and general welfare. So this is what gives Congress the power to tax, to borrow money on the credit of the United States, to regulate commerce with foreign nations. We've talked about these powers, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization, uniform laws on the subject of bankruptcies. So naturalization is allowing immigrants to come in and become naturalized citizens of the United States, as well as bankruptcy. We haven't even talked about bankruptcy, nor is it going to be something that's going to be on the test. But essentially, the United States government gives individual citizens as well as businesses a way, if they are just crushed by their debt, a way that they can be absolved or relieved of some or all of their debt. And basically, they have to go through a process, but they can reduce the amount of money they owe to their creditors or possibly eliminate all of it altogether. There are actually a lot of businesses right now, because of the pandemic, there are several businesses that are filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection so that they can keep their businesses, but their creditors, aren't coming after them, because there's a lot of businesses, a lot of individuals too, that are going through financial trouble during the pandemic. The power to coin money is right there. Again, this is all Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. To provide for the counterfeit, punish people for counterfeiting money. Post offices, we've talked about that. This is copyrights and patents, to promote the progress of science and useful arts. It's basically, if you have a great idea, a great invention, then Congress, through the U.S. Patent Office, is going to protect your great idea or great invention. So that's that right there. Basically, this is the power to create other courts besides the United States Supreme Court. Punishing piracy on the high seas, the power to declare war, to raise and support armies and a navy, all of this. Here it is right here. This is the final part right here. The last part of Article 1, Section 8, to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. So, for example, you will notice in Clause 1, it says the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes and provide for the common defense and general welfare. That's in the preamble to the Constitution, right? The general welfare. Nowhere in Article 1, anywhere in Article 1, does it say that Congress has the power to create a health insurance system, right? Like the Affordable Care Act. So there are some critics of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, that say Constitution doesn't say anything about healthcare. Therefore, we should not be in the business of providing health insurance for people who can't afford it. But the other side, the side that supports the Affordable Care Act and supports even going further, you may have heard of welfare or Medicare for all. The idea that the United States government should do even more to provide health insurance, health coverage for American citizens in the way that other countries do, England and Canada and Denmark, and other countries provide even greater health protections and health insurance and health care for their citizens. So one look at the Constitution would say, well, nowhere does it say healthcare, so you can't do that. You can't do Obamacare. But this is what another constitutional argument would be. It says right here, the general welfare, right? And so if Congress can collect taxes for the general welfare, basically the Supreme Court has ruled that paying for Obamacare is kind of like a tax, or the Affordable Care Act. And so right here, Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. Necessary and proper. So essentially what this means, and it's not just affordable care, it's not just health care, it's basically this clause right here gives Congress the power to do everything that it has done since 1787 when the Constitution was written. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say anything about airport security. They could not even conceive of airports and airplanes back then. But it was necessary and proper for the general welfare to protect the citizens of the United States, especially after 9/11. And so the Department of Homeland Security was created after 9/11, and the Transportation Security Administration, the TSA, they're the ones who check the security that check us at all airports. Prior to 9/11, it was various like private security agencies that used to be in charge of airport security. And after 9/11, the federal government took over and said, we're going to have one uniform policy all across the country to protect American citizens, to protect all Americans, to protect all people, frankly, who are traveling in and out of the United States. And so that's how that was born. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say anything about airplanes or airports, but Congress shall have the power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers. So essentially anything that's not mentioned, armies, navies, post offices, copyrights, patents, bankruptcy, all of that, if it's not specifically mentioned, but Congress wants to do it, the federal government wants to do it, they'll invoke the necessary and proper clause. Well, it's necessary and proper to run this country. It's necessary and proper to have health care for all Americans. It's necessary and proper to have airport security for all Americans. So that's the purpose of the necessary and proper clause. So or the elastic clause. It's the same thing, and the reason why it's called the elastic clause is because it's stretchy. You can stretch it, right? It basically stretches over everything, because all power that Congress has given to itself in the past 200 plus years has been because of the elastic clause or the necessary and proper clause. So Leo, I hope that helped answer your question. And if not, then go back in the chat and let me know, and we'll talk about it some more. Okay, Sadie Van Gerpen asks a great question. Could you please go over what the qualifications are to be a justice in the United States Supreme Court? Sadie, that is a super easy question for me to answer, because the answer is there are no qualifications. There are qualifications in the Constitution to be a member of the House of Representatives, to be a member of to be a senator, to be the president of the United States. In order to be a justice in the United States Supreme Court, you need to be nominated by the president of the United States, and then you need to be confirmed by a simple majority vote in the Senate, right? So Sadie, the next time there is an opening on the Supreme Court, you could be nominated by the president of the United States to be the next. They could just say, you know what, Sadie Van Gerpen, you have been through Mr. Ippolito's U.S. history and government class. You are clearly, therefore, very qualified to be a justice on the Supreme Court. So I'm going to nominate you. But that, and so if anyone would bristle at the thought of an 8th grader serving on the United States Supreme Court, that's why we have the Senate approve. I'll give you an example of how the Senate provides a check. This is an example of checks and balances. So President George W. Bush, this was in the 2000s. He was president when you were born, most likely, if you're an 8th grader right now. President George W. Bush nominated his personal legal counsel, who later went on to be White House counsel. Her name was Harriet Miers, and he nominated her to be the next justice on the Supreme Court. However, she really didn't have much experience as a judge. She had zero experience as a judge. And while she was a very nice person and had a good knowledge of the law and was an attorney, she really didn't have the qualifications that most people would consider necessary to be a justice of the United States Supreme Court. Had been a judge for 0 days of her life. And so the United States Senate, they start talking and like, we don't think this is going to work, Mr. President. So we'll put her through the process if you want, but I think we're going to vote her down. And so President George W. Bush had a polite conversation with Harriet Miers, his White House counsel, his attorney, and he was like, "Okay, I'm sorry, Harriet. This is a good idea, but maybe not such a good idea." And so he withdrew her nomination and then nominated, I believe it was Samuel Alito, whom he nominated after that, I think. Anyway, so that's also an example of checks and balances, right? So the president can nominate anybody he wants, but ultimately it has to go to the Senate for approval. Okay, Sadie, I hope that answered your question. Let me know in the chat if it doesn't. Addie Sanchez says the story of the convention and checks and balances. Okay, so question number one, the story of the convention. Well, the story of the convention, I'm not going to tell you the entire story, but I will tell you some highlights because I did take some notes. So first of all, here's what I think you need to know. I think you need to know that I think you need to know the reason why all the delegates were gathering in Philadelphia in May of 1787. I think it's important for you to understand that they originally were there because they wanted to amend the Articles of Confederation, right? Like they originally were like, you know what? We're just going to tinker with these things. We're going to create some amendments to the Articles. But if you remember that in order to amend the Articles of Confederation, this goes way back now, you needed to have a 13 out of 13 vote from all the states in the United States at that time. Well, when can you ever get Americans to agree 100% on anything? It's never going to happen. You take a look at our country today, we are certainly a divided nation, and we were still a divided nation back then as well. So when are you going to get a unanimous vote? You're never going to. And they quickly realized this. So in the summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, they're like, you know what? Amendments are just not going to be enough. So originally, those delegates went with the intention of just making a few tweaks and changes, just tinker. We'll just fix these few things and make them better. And then they quickly realized, you know what? This is just not going to happen. We need something more powerful. We need something better. We need something stronger. And James Madison from Virginia, wise person, wise founder, framer that James Madison was, he had a written draft already of a brand new constitution that was kind of all ready to go. He's like, oh, just in case we need this, here's what I came up with. Brilliant man. And so I think that's important to understand why they were originally there. They were originally at the Constitutional Convention to just tinker, just make a few fixes and changes to the Articles of Confederation. But that's not what ended up happening. What ended up happening was a complete overhaul. I think you also, in terms of the story, I think you also need to know about the compromises, which I think we put in here as well. So I think you need to know about the, how the difference between the Virginia plan, the New Jersey plan, and then ultimately the Connecticut Compromise, which is also going to be called the Great Compromise. So I'll go over those really quickly. The Virginia plan, that was the plan proposed by James Madison from Virginia, right? And his idea was, you know what? We should have a Congress that is based on how many people you have in your state. So if you have a more powerful, if you have a larger state, a more populous state like Virginia, then you would naturally have a greater voice in Congress. That made sense to James Madison. He was also from Virginia. So of course that made sense to him. Now, New Jersey was like, wait a minute, guys, we're the little guys. This isn't fair. Why are you mistreating us? So the New Jersey plan was a plan to have representation in Congress equally apportioned to each state, right? So it doesn't matter how many you have, a lot of people or you don't have a lot of people in Congress, every state is going to have an equal voice. Well, people in Massachusetts and Pennsylvania and Virginia were like, but wait, we have more Americans, so we should have more of a voice in the laws of our country since our laws affect more people in our states than they do in yours, New Jersey. So, why don't you give it a rest? And then finally, Roger Sherman from Connecticut, who was one of the 5 members of the Declaration Committee, by the way, writing the Declaration of Independence. He was one of those few men who was involved in both the Declaration and the Constitutional Convention. And Roger Sherman said, you know what, maybe we can come up with a compromise. Maybe we could do a little bit of both. What if we had 2 houses? And what if one of those houses of Congress was based on representation, like a proportional representation? So if you have a lot of people, you get a lot of representatives like California does. Or if you are like South Dakota and you don't have that many people, then you get, little representation. And then what if we create the other house to be equal representation? And so what if we compromise and we did that? And that's exactly what we did. That's called the Great compromise. It was from Roger Sherman's from Connecticut, so we call it the Connecticut Compromise, but it's more popularly known as the Great Compromise, and I think that's what it's called. What it was called in that Charlie Brown thing was the Great Compromise. So that's what that compromise was. It was the compromise between the small state plan and the large state plan, the New Jersey plan and the Virginia plan. I would also point out, while we're talking about compromises, I think it's also important for you to know about the 3/5 compromise, because the 3/5 compromise, which was, I think one of the great shames of our country in the way, and if you take a look at Federalist 54, which I made the whole YouTube video about the Federalist Papers, right? But if you take a look at Federalist 54, and I'm going to do a screen share on that in just a moment. So Federalist 54, and let's see. Let me go through and let me do a screen share here. But you don't even need to read the whole thing. So this is the part. This is the first part right here. And let me zoom in a little bit more so you can really see this text. In being compelled to labor, not for himself, but for a master, in being vendible by one master to another. By the way, we're talking about Federalist 54 here. These are the Federalist Papers. We're talking about the 3/5 compromise. It's all going to come together. And in being subject at all times to restraining his liberty and chastising his body by the capricious will of another, the slave may appear to be a degraded form from the human rank and classed with those irrational animals which fall into the legal denomination of property. So this is where we think this is Alexander Hamilton who's writing this. Remember, the Federalist Papers are the essays that were written in support of the new U.S. Constitution. So Hamilton is saying, on the one hand, it would appear as though enslaved people are animals by the way that we treat them and the fact that they can be punished, physically punished, and are basically restrained by the capricious will of another. So if the master of an enslaved person wants to be nice to you, then they'll be nice to you. And if they don't, then they won't be. And I just, here we go. In being protected, on the other hand, in his life and in his limbs, there were laws that prevented someone from just like killing an enslaved person against the violence of others, even the master of his labor and his liberty. So even there were even laws that said, well, not even the master of an enslaved person can just murder them for no reason. And in being punishable himself for all violence committed against others, you could put an enslaved person on trial for a crime. The slave is no less evidently regarded by the law as a member of the society, not as a member of the irrational creation. So Hamilton here is trying to rationalize this ultimate decision that they made for how to count slaves for the purposes of apportionment of Congress, right? And this is the 3/5 compromise. So essentially you've got, where do we get to the 2/5 part? It's again, there we go. So this is the part, Hamilton's a lawyer, and so he goes on and on and on and on and on. But this is just the final part here, and this is what I, kind of winnowed down to in the lesson that I provided for you, that YouTube lesson on the Federalist Papers. Let the case of the slaves be considered, as it is in truth, a peculiar one. Let the compromising expedient of the Constitution be mutually adopted, which regards them as inhabitants, but as debased by servitude below the equal level of free inhabitants, which regards the slave as divested of 2/5 of the man. So essentially what Alexander Hamilton is saying is this. I'll stop my screen share now. Alexander Hamilton is saying, we treat them like animals, but then again, if they do something bad, then we also punish them like humans, and we hold them accountable for knowing the difference between right and wrong. And therefore, they're sort of somewhere. And again, you have to understand, this is horrible. This is horrible, the way that enslaved people are being treated. But this is the different time. This is the 1780s. And so this is their rationalization for counting slaves as 3/5 of a human being for the purposes of apportionment. So what that means is, if South Carolina has 50,000 slaves, when they're counting up everybody to try to figure out how many members of the House of Representatives they get, those 50,000 slaves will be counted as 30,000 humans for the purposes of apportionment. So this is basically, Federalist 54 is Alexander Hamilton's way of justifying the math. Is it right? Is it humanly right at all? No. But again, you have to understand that these were founders, these were framers who were trying to grapple with this very complex idea of slavery. They're trying to grapple with the fact that, there are some people who cannot possibly conceive of how you could treat one human being could own another human being as property. And yet you had other founding fathers, framers, like James Madison, like George Washington, who were themselves slave owners. You can see how complex this is. Very smart and very well respected men who at the same time are owning other human beings as property. So all that to say, that was the 3/5 compromise. And that is the other compromise I talk about when in question number 1, I say what compromises were made. The Great Compromise, the 3/5 compromise. Those are the compromises that I want you to understand. Oh, Libby. All righty. I think we're doing pretty well so far, Libby. I don't see a whole lot of questions popping in, so I think we're doing okay. Libby, I think. Oh, and then the next part of that Addie asked. Oh my goodness, the story of the convention. You got a whole mouthful there. Checks and balances. I think the easiest thing for me to say, because I could spend the next 10 or 15 minutes talking about checks and balances. I don't know if that's the best use of our time. I would say the best thing to do is look at your study guide, because I put that right there. And if you have a question about checks and balances, like checks and balances are the way that each branch checks the other branch and limits the power of each of the other branches. So if you have a specific question on checks and balances, I would love to go over that for you, but that's really the best way for you to focus on that is that. Okay. Shrinity asks, can you explain the Federalist Papers 10, 51, 54, and 78 as simple as possible? Well, Shrinity, I am hoping that you took the opportunity to watch my YouTube video, my 19-minute YouTube video on the Federalist Papers, because, did I put it there? I hope I did. Oh, I sure did. So if you want to get a more extended explanation of the Federalist Papers, then in Google Classroom, please watch my 19-minute YouTube video where Mr. Ippolito explains the Federalist Papers. And I also have, this is what I was referring to when I was talking about Federalist 54, because there's the language right there. This is what I was just quoting here. And by the way, you know what? Let's do this. Because I can do this. Let's change this. Let's do anyone with the link. This is good stuff right here. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and I'll throw this. I just need to make sure to throw this in the correct chat. There is a link to this document right here that I'm sharing. The Federalist Papers, you can watch the 19-minute video, or you can just listen to me do the quick abridged version right here. So essentially, Federalist 10 is about faction. Faction, James Madison defines faction as a group of people who are united by a common interest, and who have the tendency to want to take away the rights of others, right? So that's Federalist 10. So let's say, for example, that there is, there are all sorts of controversial topics that I could delve into. Let's say that that someone wants to take away your right to eat bananas. Let's say very non-controversial. Someone wants to take away your right to eat bananas, and someone wants to make a law about that. Well, and there is like this anti-banana coalition that is building in the United States. And actually, let me just take it to a real world thing. Let's talk about prohibition. Prohibition was the movement for a long time in this country to outlaw alcohol because of the evils of alcohol and alcohol abuse, the destruction that alcohol causes to families, to marriages, to work, to livelihoods. And so there was for a long time a movement to restrict or eliminate the right of people to be able to drink alcohol in the United States. And eventually it worked. And eventually we got to the point where we had a constitute. There was such a movement in the United States that alcohol was wrong, that it was evil, it was a moral evil, it was a religious evil. And so finally we got this amendment passed. Like, it was very, very slow. This took 50, 60, 70 years. James Madison says in Federalist 10, essentially he's saying that if a group of people want to take away your rights, it's going to take a long time for them to do it. And the right to consume alcohol was something that they were fighting. The prohibitionist movement was fighting for a long time to do. And eventually they got it. They got their way after like 70 years, because this movement started in the in the 1830s, 1840s is when the prohibition movement got started, and it finally was passed. Gosh, it took almost 100 years, because it passed in 19 uh 1920, I think it was. And so yeah, so almost 100 years it took. But even then, after a constitutional amendment, we had a debate. Well, not only a debate, but we had a lot of people breaking the law. It's essentially what happened. A lot of people were protesting the law and refused to follow the law. And you had, during the 1920s, you had people violating prohibition and breaking the law and drinking alcohol and buying and selling alcohol. And it was happening to such a degree, and there was just such an outcry against that, that finally there was another constitutional amendment 13 years later in 1933 that repealed the 18th Amendment. So there was another amendment that got rid of the original amendment. So Americans couldn't drink for a while, and then they could. All that to say, what does this have to do with the Federalist Papers? James Madison says that sometimes a faction, a group of people, want to take some right away. And if that happens, we're going to make it very, very difficult. It took 90 years to prohibit alcohol, and still then it only lasted for 13, and then that got revoked. So we have, and I'll give you one more example. Marriage equality was a fight that the LGBTQ community was fighting for a long time. The right of a man to marry another man, or a woman to marry another woman, and that took a really, really long time. And that there was a group of Americans who, for a very long time, fought that and wanted to prevent that from being allowed nationwide. The ability for for a man to marry another man, a woman to marry another woman. Finally, though, after a long fight in the Supreme Court case, the Obergefell case of 2015, finally that was overturned. So there are groups of people, there are groups of Americans who may want to take away the rights of other Americans, but the Constitution is going to make it difficult for that to happen. And ultimately, I think, in the view of James Madison, the Constitution is going to guide us to granting people more rights than taking away those rights. So that would be my interpretation of Federalist 10. Federalist 10 is a complicated one. Faction is what it's about. Groups of people who want to take away the rights of others. That's Federalist 10. Federalist 51 is checks and balances and separation of powers. That's going to be super easy. I'll make that easy on you. Federalist 54 is about the 3/5 compromise, and Federalist 78 is about the judicial branch. I'll slow down a little bit on this one, because Federalist 78, this was written by Alexander Hamilton. We know it for sure. Alexander Hamilton says this Constitution is going to grant federal judges and Supreme Court justices their jobs for life, and this is why we're going to do it, because the executive branch has the power of the sword. These are Hamilton's words. The executive has the power of the sword. The legislative branch has the power of the purse. They have the power to raise money and to spend money. The judicial branch, the court system, has neither the power of the sword nor of the purse. The judicial branch has merely the power of judgment, which means the judicial branch, just their sole responsibility is to determine whether or not the actions of the president, the actions of the executive branch, the laws passed by Congress are constitutional or not. Are we following the law? Are we following the Constitution? That is the court system's only responsibility. And because that is their one and only responsibility, we need to make sure that we give them jobs for life so that they cannot be influenced by politics. They cannot be influenced by elections or by money or political contributions or any of that. They don't need any of that. Politicians, people who run for president, people who run for Congress, they want to get reelected. They want to get voted. They need money for campaigns to do that. So politicians can be bought off. Politicians can be swayed. Politicians can be, just follow the money. If you ever want to know what a politician's priorities are, you just look at who is donated to their campaign, and that's how you're going to know. So politicians can be influenced by money, by the desire for power, by the desire to get reelected. Judges, if you take that all away, take all the elections away, then they can truly be independent. Judges, Supreme Court justices can truly rule independently and based on what they believe is a correct and sound interpretation of the law. And that's why we take our most important matters, our most important conflicts that occur in our country, our most important disputes, and we take them to the court system and ultimately to the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court, and they are the ones who make the final decision. And after that, they have spoken. It's like the Mandalorian. I have spoken. And so that's what Alexander Hamilton is saying in Federalist 78. We need to have these justices served for life, and we need to have them independent. You look at other countries, especially during the 1700s, you look at other countries and the judicial branch, the court system, they were just puppets of the king or puppets of the emperor, or they were controlled by the executive branch. They were controlled by other people. Our judges, our justices, and still today, other you look, there are examples of corruption and influence peddling among other court systems in other countries, and for the most part, the judges cannot be influenced. Now, there is someone named Kirsten Chapman who is saying the power of judicial review is not in the Constitution, which is correct. The power of judicial review is not in the Constitution. However, in the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803, Chief Justice John Marshall, and joined by a majority of the justices, basically used their power under Article 3 of the Constitution to grant themselves the power of judicial review. So they interpreted that in the Constitution. And we can have a constitutional debate over whether or not that power was justified. But the Supreme Court at the time, in the early days of the Supreme Court, did not have I would argue was an unequal branch. The legislative and the executive branches were far more powerful than the judicial branch. And I would say that the Marbury versus Madison decision, in which the Supreme Court granted itself, or clarified rather, that power of judicial review, I think that's when they truly had, they truly became an equal branch of the within the three branches of government. So Kirsten Chapman, I would love to discuss that further with you if you're interested. But I do want to focus, because judicial review is not specifically on this exam. I do want to get back to the study guide since we have 13 minutes left. So Srinidhi, hopefully I explained that as clearly as I possibly could. Nia said, is the federal system the same as federalism? It is the exact same thing. It's just called by two different names, but I want you to understand that they're the exact same thing. Nika asks, can you explain number 4 in the study guide, which I did earlier, Nika. So perhaps if you came in a little bit late, Nika, I will tell you this, that if you rewind back to, like, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes in, it was one of the first things I talked about, because I talked about the Venn diagram here, this one right here. And if you click, this is in the enhanced version. And if you click here on this link, which is now popping up, it's this right here. Look for this, rewind and go back, and you can see this. Oh, Tyler. Hello, Tyler. Yes, Tyler, you're exactly right. Okay. So anyway, but Tyler, I hope that the answer is still, the response is still the same, Tyler. That the power of judicial review was something that the Supreme Court gave itself in its interpretation of Article 3 of the Constitution. Okay. So Nika, that I hope I've taken care of that. Just rewind. Leo, you're welcome. Sadie, you're welcome. Mason asks, what is bicameral legislature? Bicameral is Latin for two-chamber. So it's a two-chamber legislature. We have a two-chamber legislature. It is the House of Representatives and the Senate. Those are the two chambers in our bicameral legislature. Is there a Quizlet for the vocab words? Nika, there's not. And I had mentioned, maybe I didn't mention it all the classes, but I was really hoping to move my students more in the direction of creating their own Quizlets. And so the short answer is no, I did not create a Quizlet for this one. So no, there is no Quizlet, but you can make your own Quizlet. That's the beauty of Quizlet, is you can create your own. So no, yeah, sorry, Nika. Will we have a Quizlet? Oh, and Mahith, that's answering the same question for you. Srinidhi and Tyler and Nia, you're welcome. Okay. Oh my goodness, it's 7:49. We're 49 minutes in, and have I answered each and every question? While you are possibly thinking of some other questions, I'll just kind of quickly go over, because we've really talked about 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think I've talked about that pretty thoroughly on the front side. I'm going to take a quick sip of water here. You know about the qualifications to be a member of Congress. You know about the elastic clause, Article 2, Article 3. 1, 2, and 3, you know. Article 1 is the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive. Article 3 is the judicial branch. Question number 5, letter F. Oh my goodness, we just talked about that. Should the Supreme Court justice be a job for life? And what does Alexander Hamilton say about this? I think I fully explained my position on Alexander Hamilton's position in Federalist 78 on that. Let me talk about question number 6. Question number 6 is on the Bill of Rights. And let me say this. So we never got around. I had a lot of questions. There were students who were like, Mr. Ippolito, no, help me. I had a lot of students think that this was a mistake. Wait, Mr. Ippolito, it says First Amendment first. Clearly that must be a mistake. Excuse me. Oh, okay. Got a little more water in me. There we go. And then they see 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th. They thought this was a mistake. This is not a mistake. There are 5 freedoms. You notice up the side here, it says the 5 freedoms of the First Amendment go here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 freedoms here. We did not dive in as deeply as I wanted to dive into the Bill of Rights, which is not a problem. We're going to dive. We'll do a selective dive. It's not going to be a full dive, but a selective dive after winter break. But I will tell you this, which is what I wrote. Let me stop my screen share here. These are my notes that I wrote right here. It says this. This will be a short answer question based on you be the judge. On Thursday and Friday in class, you had an assignment. We did what I think was a very fun lesson on different Supreme Court cases of the last like 40, 50 years. And if you go to, I think this is important. If you go to Google Classroom, and if you click on your Pear Deck takeaway, then you can download your Pear Deck takeaway. Those are all of the notes from the lesson that we did on You Be the Judge, the Bong Hits for Jesus case and the other Supreme Court cases that we studied. And then I also, for those students who were absent, because I had I had a handful of students that were absent on Friday. I don't think anybody was absent Thursday, but had some students that were absent on Friday. I recorded all the audio. I didn't record the faces of people, but I recorded the audio of our entire discussion in my 6th period class. And so you can go over all of that. I will tell you that on the test tomorrow and Tuesday, there's going to be a short answer question on those court cases. So if you recall, and I will show you be the judge. Here we go. I'm going to show these to you. We've already gone over this, but I want to go over this with you one more time. So if you recall, this is the Frederick v. Morse case. Remember the Bong Hits for Jesus case? It was a First Amendment case, right? And so for each one of these, you're going to need to know like what was involved, right? What's the case? What's the amendment? And then how do you rule? So you're going to need to know the outcome of each of these cases. So in this case, remember the school district won. And then in the Tinker case, it was the students who won. And then in the Schenck case, it was the United States government that won, right? That was the World War I, the guy who was trying to get men to avoid the draft. The Miranda case, it was, if you recall, this was a fascinating, there were some people who were so angry when we were talking about the Miranda case. So remember Miranda, he was the one who was unaware of his rights. He was unaware of his right to remain silent, his right to an attorney before questioning. And so it's because of this case that police had to start issuing the Miranda warning. Some of my students were very angry about this. But then you recall, I told you the story of how Ernesto Miranda's, finished his life. And also I told you, of course, that as a result, the justice system had to get smarter. They got smarter. So they brought him back. It wasn't that he was found not guilty. It's just that the case had to be thrown out of court. And so they had to retry the case. So this was This, just to be clear, these first three, First Amendment, right? First Amendment, freedom of speech. This, if you recall, was the Fifth and Sixth Amendments. Fifth Amendment is your right against self-incrimination. You don't have to testify against yourself. In other words, your right to remain silent, and then also your right to an attorney. That was the Miranda case. And then the Kylo case, and this is the last case that we got to in this. The Kylo case was, there was one case that we never got to, but the Kylo case, if you recall, was about the Fourth Amendment, your right against unlawful search and seizure. And if you recall, the Supreme Court ruled that when the authorities went and searched his home using that thermal image scanner, right? They were, even though they were outside the home, they didn't actually go inside the house. That thermal imaging scanner was considered an unlawful search. It was a violation of Danny Lee Kylo's Fourth Amendment rights, and so that was deemed, and they ruled in favor of Danny Lee Kylo. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop right there. What you need to know for number 6 is basically the First Amendment, the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments. That's really all you're going to need to know, because we never got to learning the rest of them, nor do I think it's not fair for me to hold you responsible for stuff we didn't learn about, right? So the Constitution Interactive Notebook, everything from page 1 to page 14, that I'm holding you accountable for. Everything we've learned in class, I'm holding you accountable for that. But those amendments that we never even talked about, the Eighth Amendment, the Second Amendment, we haven't even talked about those yet. We'll get to those. We'll kind of do an abridged deep dive on the other side of winter break. That'll be number 6. Number 7, how does the Electoral College work? How can someone get more votes for president? That's actually a really simple question, right? The way that someone can get more votes and still lose the presidency is because we have an Electoral College. So you need to understand the Electoral College system. You did a whole assignment, like we spent a couple of weeks on the Electoral College. So you should hopefully know all about that. And then finally, number 8 is really just more of a reflection, right? Number 8, question number 8, that is a reflection on an assignment that you've already done. So, so I would, if I were you, I would dig up that assignment now, right? I would go back into, let me do another screen share here. I would, before the test, I would go back and dig, view more, scroll down to, it's the, where is it? Do I have to view more? Oh, there it is, electoral map predictions. I knew it was there. So electoral map predictions, I would look at your assignment. Look at the assignment that you submitted for the electoral map predictions, because that question is going, when I ask you that question, it's going to be a short answer question on the exam, and you're going to need to know like how your prediction went. What did you predict, and how close were you? And you're going to need to reflect on that. So this question isn't necessarily even a testing how much you know. It is really just kind of an analysis of what you have already learned, right? You're kind of reflecting more on what you learned about that. How close was your prediction? And for the first time ever, you get to see this before anybody else does. I told you that there was going to be a prize for anybody who tied Mr. Ippolito or scored better than Mr. Ippolito. And of course, in order to tie me, you need to get 49 states, 49 out of 51. It's 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And so the prize, this is very exciting. For anybody who tied or got better than me, I had special stickers made, and you can see that sticker right there. You will be deemed a history rock star, and I will send this to you. So anybody who scored as good or higher than I did, you can see, oh, there we go. It's focused now. There is the sticker that you will receive, and that is your prize. So I didn't have enough, to give everybody like a $10,000 cash prize, or, a new Xbox or PlayStation 5 or anything. But you get something that you cannot purchase in a store, and that is your very own History Rockstar sticker that you can put on your laptop or put on your water bottle. Okay, we're almost out of time. So let's see here. Mahith asks, after the test, what will we do in the following classes before winter break? Well, Mahith, there will be one more class before winter break. There's only one more, because we have, if you think about it, tomorrow and Tuesday, that's when I'm giving the test, right? It's an A day and a B day, and then Wednesday and Thursday, and then there's no school Friday. So there's only, after you take the test, there is only one more history class after, and you're just going to have to come to class and find out what we're doing on your very last day of class before winter break. And then Nika says, if I got 3 states off, do I put mine as 48 out of 51? Yes, that would be 48 out of 51. Good question. Okay. Well, hey, it is 8 o'clock, and I think I've answered every question. So I think we're good. I think. So we're gonna take that test tomorrow in my first period class, and then we'll take it on Tuesday in periods 4, 5, and 6. Thank you so much. You asked great questions. I think we had a great discussion of Unit 3, the Constitution, and I am super excited about this exam. And I hope that you, even if you aren't excited, I hope you at least feel prepared and you understand exactly what this test is going to look like and how it's going to be formatted. And hopefully you have a lower anxiety level as a result of spending your time, your 1 hour of time with us this evening. So folks, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for throwing some stuff out in the chat. And I really appreciate you being in my class and asking great questions and participating. So thank you so much. Libby, hey, can you unmute yourself?
But before we go, Sadie had a quick question. She
okay.
said, how do we mark states like Maine where it could be 2?
Well, so Sadie, if you got it mostly right, if you got Maine or Nebraska mostly right, so if you called Nebraska for Trump, or if you called Maine for Biden, then you can give yourself credit for that. So now I'll give you an extra thumbs up if you gave the one, because it ended up being 1 vote in Nebraska for Biden and 1 electoral vote in Maine for Trump. So if you got the little stripe in there, then that was even more accurate. So an extra thumbs up for you there. But you can consider, if you did all red for Nebraska, all blue for Maine, then you give yourself credit for that. So, all right. All right. I think we got everything. Diego says bye. Thank you. And I'm going to say goodbye and thank you, Libby. Thank you for joining, and thank you to everybody for being here, and have a great night. And I will see you in class either tomorrow or Tuesday. Bye-bye. Thank you. All right. I need to stop this. Here we go. Bye-bye.